and welcome to Telewizja Republika. The massacre at Crocus City Hall in Moscow, resulting in the death of 139 lives, has quickly evolved into a narrative of blame and conspiracy, reminiscent of the historical tactics employed by Russian secret services experts on conspiracy. At the heart of this narrative lies President Vladimir Putin, or as we call it, Mr. Vladov Putler. The accusation towards Ukraine and pointing to ISIS as an entity responsible for this attack is nothing new when it comes to historical tactics of KGB and FSB. As you can read on our Substack account, there are hundreds of documents, hundreds of articles, and tons of information pointing that there is a one world center of international Islamic terrorists. The person who claimed that this place is Moscow, and particularly the FSB headquarters or former KGB headquarters Lubyanka, is no one else than Alexander Litvinenko. 1 year before he was executed and killed with the polonium dose in London, he gave an infamous, or actually famous, interview pointing to the infamous individuals like Mr. Chakal, like people like Yasser Arafat, people like Saddam Hussein, being actually an assets of KGB. He also claimed in an article and in an interview that Al-Qaeda as an entity was also controlled and treated by the FSB and KGB as asset, pointing to certain individuals high on the command chain of Al-Qaeda being actually the assets of FSB. Moreover, the highest ranked defector, Romanian intelligence commander who defected to the West, to the United States, man who was very close to Nicolae Ceausescu, General Ion Mihail Pacepa, on several occasions claimed that the whole Palestinian liberation movement with Yasser Arafat being an asset of the communist secret services. Ion Mihail Pacepa, in his books, claimed that he was personally controlling movements of those people while he was still in charge in communist Russian secret services. There are lots of other examples. We point to them in articles you can find on our Substack. About 1 kilometer away from the place where I sit right now, in the Warsaw Victoria Hotel in the early 1980s, one of the organizers of a 1972 Munich Olympic Games terrorist attack was shot 5 times by Israeli secret services. And there is a reason for which a man who was organizing one of the biggest terrorist attacks in the history was drinking coffee as if nothing ever happened in the city center of a Warsaw city controlled by Russian communists back then in 1981. There is a reason for which Islamic terrorists could travel easily to Russia and to the Russian satellites. Poland, among other former communist countries, was a kind of safe haven for those people. And nothing really changed after the Soviet Union collapsed. The example of 1999 apartment buildings bombings, the reason for which Alexander Litvinenko was ultimately killed by his secret service, KGB, was revealing the true nature of the mechanisms that took place and were executed to run the Second Chechen War and to bring Vladimir Putin and Nikolai Patrushev to positions number 1 and 2 in Russia. We talked about it and we showed that in our Reset documentary series because this individual, this power duo and the power structure of FSB is still controlling Russia. And despite the several events of that kind, like Beslan, like Nordost, like Dubrovka, like other events of that kind, didn't change the Western attitude towards Russia. Russian politicians simply claimed that Vladimir Putin is just a politician that we can deal with. The effect? In 2014, Russia illegally annexed Crimea and started war that in 2014 caused about 300 people being killed by a missile shot from the Russian military device with a rocket book. The MH17 flight was the very reason for which the Western intelligence agencies had to start treating Russia in different manner. We know that because New York Times a couple of weeks ago published a story that this particular event was the moment when CIA decided to start cooperation with a certain part of Ukrainian intelligence. The outcome, 10 years later, Ukraine was able to kick away Russia of the territories that it hoped to conquer in 3 days. But what we see right now, coming back to old moves of Russian secret services, is obvious situation that we should look at in the same way as we looked at the things that happened in 1999. Back then, Chechen Islamic terrorists were to be responsible. Now, in 2024, Ukrainian Islamic terrorists will be to blame. And the result? Well, we're going to see that, but surely it is going to have something to do with the imperial plans and ambitions of Russia. You can join us on rachoń.com. You'll find the text that I'm referring to on our website, and you can leave us your email. We'll come back to you with our daily reports from the front lines of the ongoing war against the West. And that's what we are going to talk about on my show. My name is Michał Rachoń. This is Rachoń. And we roll in.
Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go!
John Schindler, as our viewers know, is a security expert and former National Security Agency, or no such agency, should I say, analyst and counterintelligence officer, a specialist in espionage and terrorism. He's also been a Navy officer and a war college professor. You can find him on Twitter at 20 Committee, and you can find him on Substack. John has an excellent Substack account, topsecret.umbra.substack.com, which is a great daily update of intelligence news world and links. John, welcome back to Telewizja Republika. Great to see you again.
Great to be here as always.
Tons of things to cover. When we set up this meeting, we were to talk mainly about the Moscow attack, and we will. But before we do so, 2 weeks ago, we've been traveling with our crew through the bridge that just collapsed. I mean, the footage that was released, just incredible. This is a top story of your today top secret Umbra newsletter. What do we know about it? I mean, we know that 7 people are. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, what we know from the footage for sure is that a large Singapore-flagged freighter leaving the port of Baltimore, Baltimore is the 8th busiest port in the United States, collided with the bridge. The ship, these are massive ships. They can't turn or stop easily. The ship appears to have had a power outage just before colliding with the bridge. There's a lot of footage of the collision. We sort of have seen what happened. And it completely collapsed the span of the bridge. This is a very major bridge. It's been around for almost 50 years. I've been on this bridge many times myself. I think America is sort of shocked by all this. But as of yet, the authorities have said there's no indication of terrorism. Although, as always, we will see where this goes. As of right now, I think this is just a terrible, terrible accident.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we've been traveling that route many times. We've been doing our duties while being in Washington and New York and traveling back to the airport. Okay, John, since we do not know anything more right now, maybe one more question. what is the way that people of your profession look at the events of that kind? Where would you look for some indications that it could be something else than the next? And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just asking a general question. When you are analyzing those kind of events, what do you look for to be sure that this is something that just happened and not because somebody made it happen?
Right. Well, the first thing that will happen is the United States Coast Guard, which is responsible for maritime safety, will interview the crew of the freighter to get their side of what happened. How do they believe this occurred? And that can have criminal implications, but is mainly just to establish what actually happened here. And of course, they will take forensic data from the ship. Then they will also analyze this apparent power outage that happened right before the collision with the bridge. And was this just an accident? These things do happen. You can have multiple generators fail. This does from time to time happen. Or was there something unnatural in this? And obviously, if we were making a movie, this would be Chinese hackers make the ship collide with the bridge and shut down the eighth biggest port in America. There's no indication that happened, but that has to be ruled out. And an examination of why there was a power outage on the ship will reveal if there's anything mysterious here, plus any interviews with crew members who witnessed what actually happened, as well as eyewitnesses to the collision. Even though this happened in the middle of the night, as we see from the camera footage, there were many people around. What did they actually witness? And what does that tell the Coast Guard and probably the FBI as they investigate this to rule out terrorism or any criminal act?
Yeah, it looked like there were. We've seen cars being on the bridge the moment it happened. As far as I remember, there are some kind of construction works in the area over there. And we know that as we record this interview, the services are searching for at least 7 individuals, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, John, let's move to the things that the whole world is asking the questions about, which is the Friday. Friday. We had a Russian rocket in our airspace on Sunday, which was breaking news on Sunday. But before we move to that, on Friday, the attack on the shopping mall in Moscow, and again, before we managed to grasp the first news, it was obvious that the Islamic terrorists are going to be blamed for this, that we are going to be presented proofs that this is an Islamic terrorist attack. And we knew it here in Poland because we've already seen several similar situations in Russia over the span of 25 years of ruling of Vladimir Putin, former FSB colonel. What do you make of the whole discussion, of all this official information that was transmitted? And what do you make of the Afghanistan ISIS cell being responsible for this stuff? Actually, people related to Tajikistan, but Afghanistan plot is also present there. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's important to remember how involved with Islamic terrorism Vladimir Putin's entire rule has been now for 25 years. He, of course, comes to power in 1999 alongside the supposed Chechen bombing of apartment buildings in Moscow, killing over 300 people, which has all the appearances of being an FSB operation, although exactly what happened is not clear. You had the Beslan atrocity. You had numerous Chechen terrorist attacks, other jihadist attacks on Russia, some of which are very mysterious in origin. And now it's happened again. And of course, this presents both problems and opportunities for Putin. The problems because he is supposed to be the one who he claims keeps Russia safe from jihadist extremism. But of course, there are opportunities since Putin is blaming Ukraine one way or the other. The latest Kremlin line from Putin himself is that, yes, jihadist extremists from the Islamic State Khorasan province were behind this mall attack, which killed, last I heard, 137 people, a terrible thing. But really, Ukraine was behind it, according to Putin. And that's clear, that's obviously the way the Kremlin is going to spin this, that no matter who actually pulled the trigger, Ukraine is behind us. And this is classic Kremlin messaging. I mean, we've been down this road many times where in Russia, there really isn't much independent media left at all. There's no one who can dispassionately investigate. They have to take what the FSB says, and that's simply the Kremlin's version of the truth. I think the most likely scenario here is the one that is obvious, which is these are, in fact, they're now up to 8 people in custody, Tajik nationals. Some of them were resident in Russia who were allegedly behind this terrorist attack. I'm sure that's all in some version true, but of course it doesn't answer the question of who was really pulling the strings here. Let it be said that ISIS Khorasan, as they call themselves, which is an ancient province in what is now Afghanistan, Iran, and Central Asia, they really are on the rise. The FSB arrested a cell of them in Russia a few months ago. They're making attacks all over the place. That's real. Now, who really pulled the strings here, we don't know. And of course, there are many options, one of which is exactly what it seems to be. The Islamic State decided to execute an attack in Moscow because they can. Of course, Zakharova, the Russian foreign minister spokeswoman, yesterday made the comment that isn't it strange that ISIS only attacks the enemies of the United States and NATO? The Russians are playing this for all it's worth. They will try and make a bad story, which is Russia was vulnerable to jihadist terrorism, despite everything the FSB does to supposedly crack down on it, and they will seek to blame the West for it one way or the other. And that's what you're seeing already.
John, Vladimir Putin was a politician back then, a former. Back in 1999 and 2000, right. He was he came out of FSB. He was a prime minister for a short time, and then he became a president of Russian Federation. He promised that he's going to chase the terrorists even in a toilet, let's put it this way.
Yes, he did. Very famously.
Let's put it this way. 25 years later, he is still chasing those terrorists, and each time he has an opportunity to chase them, a lot of Russian citizens die. And in the process, Russia creates another war or sends its troops to another place where Russian imperial interests are covered in that way, or secured, as would probably Vladimir Putin say. What is the mechanism of the alleged responsibility of FSB for the infamous 1999 bombings? We quoted, and I quoted it on my Substack a couple of days ago, that Alexander Litvinenko, 1 year before he was killed in London, he gave a famous interview in which he said that the world center of Islamic terrorism is Lubyanka, Moscow. And he came back to all the stories of famous or infamous Islamic terrorists, even before the era of Al-Qaeda or ISIS, people who were obviously assets of KGB, people who obviously had contacts with the communist secret services. Mikhail Pachepa, the late general of communist secret services who passed away 2 years ago, wrote 2 books about the way he was controlling assets in the Islamic world of terror. It isn't anything new that Russia, KGB, FSB is using Islamic terror as a tool. What is the sense in this kind of activity without ruling and making it obvious or stating surely that this is basically what happened this time?
Well, as you pointed out, the FSB and its KGB ancestors, the Chechists, have a very long history of very murky relations with Islamic terrorist organizations in Russia and far beyond, going back far into the Cold War. As a KGB general once said to me, the best way to fight terrorism is to create your own terrorists. And that's the perfect encapsulation of the Chekist view of all this. And as you pointed out, going back many, many decades, the KGB had relationships of many kinds with Islamic terrorist organizations, some cases controlling them, some cases merely influencing them to harm the West, to keep them from attacking Russia, all these normal motivations. The 1999 apartment bombings outside Moscow that really brought us Putin as he is today and launched the Second Chechen War. these were committed by the FSB. I don't think anyone who's looked at this dispassionately debates that. It's just a question of what exactly happened. I mean, we know that, somehow FSB officers with the exact same very rare explosive hexagen used to destroy the apartment buildings were caught at a different apartment complex. I think the only question about the FSB's involvement in the 1999 bombings is, did Putin know about it? Or was this something done to impress the boss on local initiative? It's Russia. That's very possible. But the FSB's involvement in the 1999 bombing seems quite sure to anyone who's looked at it closely and honestly. Beyond that, you have the issue that a lot of things in Russia are very murky. For instance, one of the famous Chechen invasions of Russia, which were attacks of Dagestan, was actually done by provocateurs from GRU, Russian military intelligence. We know this, even Russians know this. But it's also, they're much more accustomed to these very strange dealings where the spetssluzhby, the special services, are fighting the terrorists while also cooperating with the terrorists. In the Western mind, this doesn't really compute, but in the Russian mind, it does. I mean, I always point out to everyone that in 1996, the FSB arrested 3 Egyptian terrorists as they were entering Dagestan, that is Russia, from Chechnya, and they held them in custody. One of them was Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the longtime head of Al-Qaeda, who never denied that he was in FSB custody for 6 months. He is then let go, allowed to leave, and he goes to Afghanistan, where he creates Al-Qaeda with Osama bin Laden, and they partner up, and we all know the story from there.
Sorry to interrupt you, but this is exactly the take of Alexander Litvinenko. He precisely stated that this individual was an asset of FSB, and he claimed in 2006 that he was aware of it while working for FSB.
Litvinenko claimed personal knowledge of this. Correct. Exactly. He was there.
So, could you continue? Because that's very interesting. Because we have Al-Qaeda.
Yes. Yeah. No. I mean, I think it is very interesting to me that Al-Qaeda, as such, never attacked Russia. I think it's a very interesting thing that after Zawahiri spends 6 months in FSB custody and is then let go and goes off to create Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda itself never attacks Russia. I think that immediately leads to questions here. And regarding ISIS, you see some of the same patterns, although it's more with Syrian intelligence, which is, of course, allied with the Russians. The Syrian intelligence services clearly manipulated ISIS inside Syria during the recent civil war. That's, once again, classic KGB penetration infiltration techniques. And, I think the Russians, long ago, the Russian special services decided that the best way to manage their terrorism challenge was to manipulate it and infiltrate it and control it to the extent that they can. Therefore, I think there will always be questions, no matter what we find out, about what was really going on with the Moscow attack on the Music Center Mall, the Crocus City attack, because of all this complex background. The Russians are going through their usual motions of torturing these guys, getting them to confess. I'm sure they'll be sent to prison or executed. Just as with the 1999 bombings, by the way. The 1999 apartment bombings had trials that lasted for years involving Chechen terrorists, even though their involvement in all this was very questionable.
Yeah, but it's worth mentioning because it could not be clear and obvious for everyone that 2 individuals who were on the top of the chain of command, according to famous book by Yuri Felsztyński about the corporation of assassins, were guys that are still on the top 2 spots of a Russian power ladder, if we can say. Which means Vladimir Putin number 1 and Nikolai Patrushev number 2. Those 2 people were responsible for, or at least while those 2 individuals were top commanders of FSB, the operation of preparing this thing was in progress. That's the claim of people who got those information back in 2001, as far as I remember. So my question to you, John, is what is the way that, and what should we expect? Because this is a kind of, you just said that Russia is going through motions that it usually goes through. So we have those people tortured, we have them on the public view. We know that they are going to be probably dead pretty soon. But it also has some political implications. What should we expect? And what does blaming Ukraine for this mean? We didn't have much, and we didn't heard much about the Islamic terrorist movements in Ukraine.
No, there isn't much. And of course, there is a Tatar minority in Crimea, which is currently being repressed by the Russians. And the Russians regularly accuse them of being in bed with ISIS too. Of course, we will hear more about that. We will no doubt hear more of Russian sort of sly implications that Ukraine was really behind this. This will be used as justification for the undoubtedly coming Russian offensive against Ukraine this spring or summer. The Kremlin will yet again say that somehow ISIS is caught up with the Americans, and this is really somehow the CIA is behind all this, which of course is completely untrue. But they have their narrative. I mean, the Russians were saying this during the Syrian civil war when they became involved on the side of the Assad regime, that really the Americans were behind ISIS. And, you know, all this propaganda, even though we've killed far more ISIS fighters than the Russians have. It's, you know, the Russians will manipulate this tragedy in a way to support their current policy of aggression against Ukraine, mounting aggression against the West. I don't mean to alarm people, but in the last few weeks, the Kremlin, including Putin himself, have been amplifying that they are at war with the West and NATO, not Ukraine. Ukraine is merely the battlefield. And they've been saying this for years, but they've been saying it very loudly in the last couple of weeks. And I think this needs to be taken very seriously. And this tragedy will again be used to explain that somehow Ukraine, NATO, ISIS are all gathered up against Russia and killing innocent Russians. This will be the message that the Kremlin is putting out.
Yeah, with the same old plot that is actually West that is attacking itself or attacking Russia to make, to execute the imperial plans of West, because West does nothing more than dreams about taking over.
It's all about Zbigniew Brzezinski, you know, who said all this. They say this all the time. Like this is the Brzezinski plan to break up Russia. Of course, they love this. That this is all this sort of American Islamist plot to destabilize Russia. And, you know, I think at a certain level, they actually believe this. I mean, really, I think they do. I think they have internalized this so much that some of them actually believe it.
Well, that only if we think that Czechs actually believe in anything else, that the chain of command in the KGB. John, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very important that you mentioned that the Crimean Tatars, who are going to be surely at some point blamed for this, this is going to get some political leverage for Russia to do what they always been doing to the Crimean Tatars, which are basically people who live there for ages. John Schindler, you can join our guest on his excellent Substack, topsecretumbra.substack.com. I support it, and I got the daily dose of news from the intelligence world, so strongly recommend it to our viewers. John, thanks a lot. See you next time.
My pleasure. Until the next time.
Okay, ciao. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, you can also join us on our Substack. You can find it on our website, rachoń.com. So leave us your email if you do want to take a look from time to time. We try to do it daily on our reports and the things that we read while we are preparing this program. You will find it straight in your email inbox if you leave us your email address. We come back tomorrow with this program. See you soon. Ciao. Bye-bye.